What's up, everybody? It's Trey Smith back with another episode of the College GameTime podcast. We are quickly becoming the #1 show for the American Athletic Conference fans of football and basketball. Look, I'm going to try and get through this opening part very quickly because I have a special guest today to discuss what's all going on with the realignment, the AAC, and the potential I don't want to say merger, but the potential expansion of the 4 remaining PAC schools. There is mutual interest there. News broke last night, and what's being reported today is that the ACC is saying no to Stanford and Cal. Obviously, in a season like this, everything's on the table, but I've got Jim Williams, okay, the man, the myth, the legend on today's show, 7-time Emmy Award winner, columnist, producer, director, media consultant, host of Stream On with Jim Williams. It's none other than my friend, Jim Williams. Let's punch him in right now. Jim, there he is on the screen. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm fine. It's good to be on the show. I'm appreciative of being asked.
Oh, I'm appreciative of you accepting the invitation. And I just gave you a heck of an introduction before I brought you in here. And I wanted to talk through, we exchanged some messages on Twitter about all the stuff that's swirling around with the American Athletic Conference and the remaining 4 teams in the PAC conference, the PAC-4, if you will. And as far as you're concerned, from your vantage point, there is mutual interest between the 4 remaining teams and the American. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I kind of want to just open the door for you to share sort of what you've been hearing, kind of, you know, your expertise and experience is very much suited for this conversation.
Okay. Basically, where we are is we know that the ACC, in large part because of Notre Dame, has reached out and attempted to bring Stanford and Cal in. Now, you know, as of Wednesday night, I should say, sorry, the ACC did something very interesting. They voted not to vote. Not sure how that works, but okay. They voted not to vote on the admission of Stanford and Cal, or the offer of an invitation to join the conference. Does that mean that they will never do it? No, but it means that there's at least 4 schools that aren't on board yet. And whether or not they may be brought on board or not, we'll see. But in speaking with the American, which is what we were talking about, the American lines up well with the remaining 4 because, and specifically to Stanford and Cal, because of the fact that they have 4 AAU schools. Academically, it's there. It may be an interesting situation. We may find out that there might be a merger, which would give the American and the PAC the ability to work together as an autonomy 5 conference. That would be something potentially on the board. Or it may be just them onboarding Stanford, Cal, Washington State, Oregon State. It's very much real. Let's go with the fact that Tony Petitti, who is the new Big Ten Conference commissioner.
Yep.
And Mike Aresco, who is the reigning American commissioner, have known each other for years. Okay. They go all the way back to their days at CBS. They're college football fanatics. I can't, under any circumstances, think that if the Big Ten were serious about bringing on Stanford and Cal, that Mike Aresco either wouldn't have phoned Tony first and said, "Tony, are you interested? Is this going to happen? Because if it's going to happen, there's no sense in me making entree to do this."
And you know, Mike, like you're not just saying that as an onlooker.
Yeah, I did not speak to him about this.
Sure, no, for sure.
I know that Tony and Mike have a relationship that would allow them to have a frank conversation about this.
Sure,
and
sure.
It's not a back thing. It's like if you were the head of the Big Ten conference, and I was the head of the American, I would call you up and say, "Look, dude, if you're going to go after them, good on you. All right, you don't have to tell me when. You don't have to tell me if any of the details. All right, but I'm going to go and make a play for them. If you're not, tell me right now if you're not." Or if it's going to be down the road, let me make my pitch. I mean, they're going to tell me yes or no. So can I make the pitch? You'll respond to me, I'm not, we're not out of the race for that, but it's not on the front burner right now. So if that's the case, and I believe that to be, I believe that I don't know if Mike and Tony talk to each other, but I do know they probably were in communication one way or the other. And so the folks at the American approached Stanford, and they probably approached Kliavkoff. I mean, I know they've spoken to the Big 12. Certainly Mike would know Kliavkoff because, they have meetings of all the commissioners.
Right.
So, and right now George is probably taking a lot of phone calls from everybody at this point. What's he got to lose, right? It's a serious thing. Now, I know both of you and I are getting pushback from the Mountain West about why not us? Well,
right.
Look, it is not the schools. All right. Look, it's not the schools. It's not that they've got terrible institutions. They don't. They have fine institutions. Where the problem is here goes back to our television situation we talked about, and that's the windows. And what does the American give the potential PAC or the potential new members of the American? What does it give them? It gives them 11:30. A 12 o'clock window on a Saturday, a 3:30 window on a Saturday, a 7:30 window, and these are all East Coast times. And then, of course, the 10:30 window. It would give ESPN the opportunity to have quality football on the West Coast, which right now they don't have.
And with that, real quick, Jim, would you agree? Because I kind of talked about this at the top of this episode from some questions that I was getting based off my episode yesterday, which is it's also from ESPN's perspective, which the network's having a big role in this process. Is it not more cost efficient for them to negotiate their deal up with the American than to try and subsidize these teams into a conference like the Big 12?
Well, first of all, they wouldn't go to the Big 12, but
okay.
If they did,
well, that's one of the things that keeps coming across as well. There's still, Oregon State should go to the Big 12, or why, mainly Oregon State's been the one.
Oregon State, Washington State again, and I feel very bad for them because they've done nothing wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. Fan base, student athletes.
They've got the fan bases and the athletes are as good as any teams in the league, and probably the fan bases are more engaged than even the big market teams like the Stanford, Cal, SC, and UCLA. So, I feel badly for them. Here's the problem. When Fox went to the Big 12, and because ESPN has pro rata in the contract, which means if you add Power 5 schools, you get a percentage of the money. Okay, I think it's 20, maybe 33%, something like that. Doesn't really matter. It's not a full share. So Fox okayed up to 12. Up to 14.
Gotcha.
The amount of full if it was a Power Five school.
Okay.
Because none of the other schools, the onboarding of UCF or Cincinnati or BYU or Houston, got a full share. Okay,
So
so
by process of elimination, then, based off what you've been saying, the ACC, they're off the table.
for the
We're
moment,
not, we're not, yeah, for the moment. And we're not saying the Big Ten is off the table for the moment either, but just reading the tea leaves of the relationship that's there between commissioners,
right?
we can conclude that they're not actively in pursuit. And
No,
then based off what you just shared, we can conclude the Big 12 is also not in pursuit, which now sort of sets this table that we're at right now.
right. Um, so yeah, the Big 12, Fox okayed full shares to all four corner schools. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that brings them to 31-7, which is where the rest of the schools are, except for the new ones: Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU.
Mm.
So that's where they are. Um, for them to go to the Big 12, the Oregon State and Washington State, they wouldn't get. They would, if they were to take, those two slots, and even if they were to take and give them half of a share, right? Which some have said, well, they'll take half of a share. Um, here's the problem, okay? As we continue through this, and it does me no. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to college sports.
Mm-hmm.
I would like regionality. I like the idea of being able to go and see games,
Sure.
where we go and we have fun, on road games. The situation is such that if your mark were to give away those two spots to Oregon State and to Washington State, and then his grand scheme of things is to add potentially ACC teams or other teams down the line. Those are two seats he gave up that he didn't have to give up.
Mm.
And so you have to look at it that way. How do they bring enough value to me to give up spaces, which maybe a UConn gets later down the road?
Yep.
And remember, as we sit here talking about the American, okay, and Stanford and all that, the Big 12 is West heavy now.
Absolutely.
Okay, they just onboarded 4 schools from the West and from the Central time zone. They were West centric before this. West Virginia, Central Florida. By the time Central Florida takes a flight, to, if they were to onboard, Oregon State, they could fly to London faster than they could fly to Oregon State. So, yeah, I think that your mark has to look at that and say, wait a minute, I'm already getting trouble from West Virginia about spending,
Yeah.
$3 and $4 million of that money that they got in simply on travel. And actually by adding Central Florida, you literally, added distance. Even Central Florida to West Virginia is 1,000-mile
For
flight.
sure.
So it's not an easy drive. So he's going to have to backfill in the East. And does that mean he's going to do it next week or a week after or what? I don't know. But I guarantee it's not going to be with Stanford, Cal, or any of the 4 schools that are left.
Well, let's take that same concern of travel and geography, and that's been another thing that has come across for me in terms of the Mountain West sort of faction. About obviously the Mountain West makes sense from a geographical standpoint, and then I think it was the Washington State president that said in the Pete Thamel report about, well, if we're going to do anything with the East, it's going to require a heck of a lot of money. That was more so in reference to the ACC, but here's my thing as it pertains to the American, because obviously the American has a strong East Coast presence, but between the presence in Texas, Tulsa, and then Wichita State for non-football or basketball, could you not, and just from your experience, could you not I feel like you could get creative with scheduling to where you could help reduce some of those traveling from, Washington to South Florida or from, one of those Northern California to Southern Florida or anything like that. And then I guess my other part to this question is, could whatever the American is able to negotiate up with ESPN, do you see it being feasible to get that number to a point where it could sort of help absorb some of those costs? That way it's not just a thing of, well, we're going to go to the conference where the travel is the least concern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because it's more value than it is travel, right?
Yeah.
So what you might
That's good.
find out,
More value than travel. I like that.
it's here's what we do, and it's not being it's being explored by all the conferences now, and that's to go take a page out of the COVID times, and that would be to go and do pod type situations where
Yes.
a number of schools would go and play, let's say baseball, for instance. Maybe what they do is they decide to do baseball. Maybe the teams from Texas fly to the Bay Area and go to Stanford and play a weekend of games where you play 6 games, where you've got 2 teams playing in the morning at 9, you get 2 teams playing at 1 o'clock, you get 2 teams playing at 4 o'clock, and maybe even play some games at night. So you can do that. They could round robin it. It's not a tournament. It's actually games that count as conference games. And then have the Stanford and Cal volleyball teams fly to Houston, or to not Houston anymore. Well, they could, from Rice is there. They could fly to Houston and they could play volleyball with a pod situation, that standpoint. So I do see a lot more of that, because I don't think that the student athletes, they're the ones getting used in this chess match between conferences, because that's a lot of travel. They don't travel on a charter like a football team does. They travel commercials, so that means just like the rest of us, if there's delays, they have to sit through them. If you have to change planes, you have to change planes. So I do believe a lot of it, and I think the other conferences are going to do the same thing, where especially the Big Ten, where they do a lot of pod situations. So I think that's going to help.
So tell me this then, okay? Because we've kind of established, and I want to be respectful of your time and keep it. We're kind of stay in this window I've been for this show, window of time. So because you went into this in our Twitter messages, I thought was excellent. We've established there is real mutual interest between the American Athletic Conference and the 4 remaining PAC institutions. Okay, so I hope everyone heard that loud and clear. What would that process look like should it start to unfold? So if I'm a fan of the American and I'm listening to this, and I'm of course people are refreshing their pages every 2 seconds, waiting for the latest news drop. What as someone who's worked in TV, who's worked with networks, who I've said at the top, a columnist, 7 Emmy Awards. I mean, you've been there, done it, seen it all. What is the process? And you laid it out for me on the Twitter, which I thought was awesome. As I said, what is that process going to look like as far as actually step by step for this, whether we want to call it a merger or whether we want to just call it the American absorbing these 4 institutions into the conference?
Right.
Sort of a play-by-play of what that's going to look like.
Well, the first thing you'll look for is the 4 schools, or the 2 schools, or the 3 schools, or whatever, however many choose to do it, would formally have to ask the American, and this is not how a merger would. This is the actual, absorbing 4. Absorbing 4 would be that you would have they would formally have to ask for an invitation. So that takes, simple letter to the commission the commissioner, to Aresco. And so Mike would take the those 4 invitations to his board. The board would then vote. Assuming the board voted yes, they would then issue the 4 invitations, at which time they would be brought on, and they would eventually have to sign a grant of rights. Now, depending upon the television contract, which I do not have, I'm not privy to what the TV contract is, but most TV contracts, and one would assume this one, has a clause in it for if we add members, how much more can we get, if anything, can we get? So at that point, they would know the number. If it's Cal and Stanford joining, it's quite possible that the conference could have conversations with their media partners and say, if we bring these 4 teams on, how much money can we assume that we're going to get for that? And then play off of that. So first they would do, as I said before, first you send in your invitation, then you get accepted, and then you begin the process of getting them to sign a grant of rights with their other group. And once they sign the grant of rights, that allows them to be represented by the American. The American then deals with their media partner, at which point they nail down a number which they're willing to pay to bring them on. So that's how it goes. It's not as we saw last week. It's not necessarily take a long time to do it. If you're inspired to do it. So yeah, it can be done quickly. So that's the first thing to do is if we begin to read that there's interest in those 2 institutions or those 4 institutions in applying for membership, then we know the process is going. Because you don't apply for membership if you're not, you wouldn't apply. Let's put it this way: you wouldn't apply for membership in such a high-profile way that this would come down. If you do not immediately understand that you're going to get, ushered into the club.
A little more discreet with it. So no, that makes sense. So in theory, yeah, that's right. I mean, for all we know, there may have already been an application sent. It just has been very discreetly. Okay, well, so let me ask this last thing, and this is me just asking for your opinion, but just based on whatever conversations you may have on a day-to-day basis, whatever, whoever you talk to and things of that nature, and you're talking mostly to some AAC fans, right? What is your honest assessment of the likelihood of us seeing these 4 PAC schools in the American Athletic Conference making something happen jointly?
It truly depends on the ACC.
Okay.
I think if Stanford and Cal get the feeling that the ACC is just, they really don't have a lot of time for this to come about. Linger. They got to make plans, because once the season is over, this season, they've got to be ready for wherever they're going to be going afterwards. So that escalates things. Normally you would say, well, they're going to take time. No, they're not going to take time this time. They don't have time to take.
Right.
So one of 2 things. If the ACC, if you're an American fan, right, you're basically hoping that the ACC says no. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that limits what they can do. I'm talking about
which reports are showing right now that is the case, right?
They're cooling on the idea.
Okay. It's good.
So let's hope, if you're, again, an American fan, hope the ACC says no. If the ACC says no, then there's three things, their options. One, they go independent. Again, that's difficult because your schedule, right?
Yep.
How do you quickly put together a schedule? Where do you put your Olympic teams? Okay, which would have to be the WCC. All of that is a situation that becomes problematic. They could, because the PAC still exists, they could start backfilling, meaning they would try to poach teams from the American and probably the Mountain West. But that takes time too, because the American, in the contract, I believe it's 28 months before you can leave. You know, you can negotiate your way out of it, but it's not going to be easy.
Right.
And then, of course, we already saw what the Mountain West has said about,
Yeah.
Getting out of there. Good luck
Yeah.
with that. So that becomes problematic because, again, you don't have enough time to get to onboard the teams that you may want to onboard. So there's really two paths here that make any sense if they are if the AAC, if the ACC chooses not to take them. One is the merger with the American, where that would be worked out between the two conferences.
Which hopefully Aresco would be in charge in that circumstance.
Please God, yes. Anyway,
sorry, not to throw you off.
I think that would be a hard sell. I think that'd be a pretty simple sell. So perhaps that could come about. Or, as we said before, the absorption of the four into the conference. Those are the two easiest, I should say, paths, if the ACC says no. I assume, and that's all I can say, I assume that if you're the American, you're not gonna go west just for Oregon State and Washington State. That makes zero sense.
So let's go for the package deal.
If you don't get the four, because you're getting the two brands, Cal and Stanford.
Yeah,
that's value. Okay, the folks at Oregon State, Washington State would reluctantly, I'm sure, have to go to the Mountain West, because that theoretically, if you're going to do all that cost cutting and everything that they're going to have to do, and that would be true, they would have to cut. They cut coaches. They probably have to cut certain sports.
Yeah.
So they would have to go there, and so that would be they would have no option. I mean, unfortunately, that would be the unfortunate situation. So okay, in the roundabout way to get to your point, I would say right now it's 50-50 that something happens between the two conferences, only because we don't know what's going on with the ACC. Watch that. If the ACC's out, then the American makes a lot of sense. And, it all depends on what, to be honest, it all depends really on what Stanford wants to do, because they're kind of the leader of the pack out there.
They're the domino. That's what I said yesterday. Now I had, from where things were sitting yesterday, I had a little bit different take, but now after hearing you, I think the package deal, knowing that that there is mutual interest between the entities as well, that sort of is a game changer. And I would imagine, with what we do know right now in regards to where the ACC stands, I would think there's probably there's some phones ringing and some ears perking up behind the scenes right now as it pertains to all the stuff that we're talking about. But Jim, listen, I know. Oh, go ahead.
One disclaimer. Okay.
Yeah.
Stanford has $18 billion in their endowment fund. Okay. They could buy the Pac-4. The one caveat I want to put down here is that they have enough sway that if pressure is put upon them, they might, and I say might because I don't know this obviously, they might be able to one last shot at the Big Ten and they might be able to talk them into it. And I think that's their Hail Mary. But when a school like Stanford makes that phone call, you got to listen. They have great relationships already in the Big Ten. So I'm saying I know that Stanford and Cal's first choice would be Big Ten. I don't think that Stanford or Cal is going to give up on that until the very, very, very last minute. And you saw what happened with Oregon and Washington.
Yep.
There was a deathbed situation there, and they came out it. So I'm always saying to the American fans is just take a deep breath and wait, because it won't. Something's going to happen soon. And when I say soon, I'm assuming before Labor Day, maybe right in early September, where anybody's going to have to make that decision. So that's what I'm trying to say is that
good stuff.
Yeah, I would say if I'm an American fan, which I am, I'd be cautiously optimistic, I think would be the way to put it. And for everybody else, we'll have to find out.
You'll have to find out. Okay, well, hey, that's Jim Williams, everybody. Jim, tell everyone where they can find you. I obviously have your Twitter X handle up on the screen here, but we have listeners on Spotify, Apple, and all that good stuff. Where can they find you?
Best way to do it is to get me at Twitter at JW Media DC. I post everything that I write up there and all the audio and video pieces that we do. So that's the best place to do it, because otherwise it can be confusing. So let's just make it simple. Go to the Twitter feed, and it's it's always on there. And it's always great to be. I'm glad to be with you for the first time on video, but it's been always fun chatting with you in the DMs.
Yeah, like I said earlier in the episode, man, Jim, especially as we were navigating the Big 12, Pac-12, and all that stuff back in June, Jim was a very valuable resource for me, just from a lot of different elements of creating content and things of that nature. So, well, Jim, I appreciate the time, and hopefully we can do it again when the season starts.